It is
3-page minutes, and there's the short one.
all right. Thanks, Mike. It's 5:30. I'd like to call our meeting to order. First item of business will be our approval of minutes. We will first approve the minutes from our October 26th meeting. Can I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
And second.
Nope.
All right. We'll give John the first to jump on the second. And good. Here's Phil. Welcome, Phil. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
Good. We have a first and a second on approving our minutes for the October 26th meeting. And now I'm just asking, is there any discussion or any corrections that need to be made? All right, hearing none, let's vote to approve the minutes. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Minutes have been approved. And then, Mike, would you put up our second set of minutes from the December 7th meeting?
Yes.
If you are on this call tonight and were not with us on December 7th, we had a situation where we had concerns that the public would not be able to participate if they wanted to in our meeting. And so we ended that meeting on advice of our council and rescheduled for this meeting that we are now in, just to make sure that everybody could be a part of it who wanted to be a part of it. So with that explanation, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our December 7th meeting?
I move approval.
I'll second.
And a second, thank you. And now, is there any discussion? All right. With that, let's vote. All those in favor of approving our December 7th minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, they have been approved. We now have a time for public comment. Mike, do we have a list of anybody who wants to comment?
I do not have a list. Let me check the...
Let's do two things for those of you who are participants who might want to give comment. If you want to raise your hand by clicking your icon, you can do it that way. Or if you want to put it in the question and answer or chat of just stating that you would like to be recognized, we can move you onto the panel and give you 3 minutes. Or up to 3 minutes. You don't have to use it all.
I don't see anybody in Q&A at this point. I don't see any hands raised.
All right. Then let's move on to item number 4, our regional project status reports. And Carla Boughton from the City of Poulsbo is here to give us an update on the PERC.
Actually, it's Mary McCluskey, and I am promoting her as we speak, and she will come up to let us know what they are requesting in a change to the ILA. And Mary's here, and she's unmuted, and she's ready to go. Hi, Mary.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or evening, whatever it ends up being right now.
It's dark outside. It's evening.
It is dark outside. That's why I turned on all the lights in the house. Thank you for letting us have a moment on your agenda tonight. we are asking for a couple of changes to our ILA that we signed just a year ago, believe it or not. And the two main things are a time extension for one more year. We really did lose, I'd say, a good 6 months earlier this year. And so we would like to have more time, and we have updated our timeline, as you will see on that last page of what we gave. Mike, I think, gave you in your agenda packet. The other thing is that we would like to be able to do is to move the money around within the different funds. So bottom line budget, but we would go to Mike with a request first and say, we need a little bit more in marketing, or we need a little bit more in the market analysis and a little bit less under another category. And we'd like to be able to do that. So the new expiration date would be December 31st of 2021. Things are going very well. We're assessing the survey results right now. We expect our first stakeholders meeting in January, and we are going to the next stage.
And there's all of the changes, the markup in there, changing everything.
The month by month.
Just about everything.
Yeah.
So, Mary, as I understand it, the request is timeline, simply an extension of 1 year to December 31st of 2021 with
Correct.
COVID as a important rationale for why that's needed. Secondly, the ability to move money within what was proposed to what you deem necessary or most helpful.
Correct. We still have the same tasks, but money-wise, as obviously as we get into things and we have different people, different groups helping us, we've learned a little bit more about what we need in pot A versus pot B, or task 1 or task 2.
Okay. With that, I'd like to open it up to the board to, Mary, anything else that you'd like to say first?
No, that's it.
All right. And then open it up to the board to ask any questions of Mary that you would have so that you have a clear understanding.
Mary, Phil Havers here. Just to clarify on I don't have a problem with the extension. Obviously, COVID is what COVID is. I guess just one concern I have is on moving money around. I'm a corporate lawyer. I also do a lot of litigation. And so I kind of see deals going well and deals going sideways and things like that. And one of the things that always, in a lot of these corporate deals kind of happens is when people do start moving money around, and I completely get and I understand why you want the flexibility within the individual things to be able to move. If attorney's fees end up being a lot less than you think, then, great, you can use it for something better.
Right.
But just that's fine for the start of it. But then what I don't like is if you kind of borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, and then, we get a call from you to come back in a year saying maybe, hey, this new section, we're on a new phase and we now kind of use some of this money to pay for some of the earlier stuff, and now we need more than we anticipated, and so it becomes a call for getting a bit more into the program than than the budget's currently allowing for it, because you were moving things around as needed. So I guess with just that concern raised and assurances from you that wouldn't happen, I don't have a problem with it.
Well, we at the city, we do bottom line budgeting. So we know that we have $243,900. That's the bottom line. So we will stick within that, and we will go to Mike with any changes that we feel that we need to do between different tasks. But we're all still working towards the same goal, and that's the perk, the feasibility of the perk.
I have a quick question. On whose authority would you move the money? Who would decide to move the money around? It says the city. Would that be the project manager?
Yes.
It would be the project.
The city staff along with the project manager.
Okay.
And Mary, did you say that you'd go to Mike and let him know if you were moving money between different categories?
Absolutely. He will give his blessing on it before we actually do it. So we'll go to him with the request and why.
Is that in the ILA proposal?
I think it is.
Yes, this is
This is Brian Lawler. Let me jump in here because I think I can shed some light on this. What we asked Paulsbo to do on the issue of moving money around is, number one, to notify the PFD, and that didn't mean Mike, it meant the PFD, so it would come to the board. And then the board has a right of reasonable approval, or approval not to be unreasonably denied, which is a lawyer term that says you'll say yes as long as everything looks okay. But it gives the board a check. And that's the same thing that we ask of Port Orchard when Port Orchard came to us 4, 5, 6 months ago and asked similarly to be able to move funds within their town.
So clarification then, Mary has said they would go to Mike, but really what the ILA and the language that we're using is that would come back to the board. It would not go to Mike, but it would come back to the board.
Right. I mean, Mary's right. It will go to Mike first, and then Mike is going to report it to the board. And then the board has a right of reasonable approval or disapproval.
Right. Other questions?
If I might make a comment, Darren?
Yeah, please.
We will also involve the construction consultant when he comes online in some of the meetings where some of these things will be discussed. And so we should have a heads up from his observations or comments in addition to the input from the city.
Right. Any other questions from the board? So at this point, Brian, what we need is simply a motion from us that these two requests for the amendment of the ILA can happen, and then approval of that.
Correct. And then, authorizing you to sign the amendment.
Okay. All right. Can someone word a motion in that regard?
I'll
Give it a try.
that the board is authorizing the amendment as proposed by Paulsbo to allow for the extensions and to allow for the reallocation of funds subject to future board approval.
And a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Pat. All right. Any discussion?
I just had one more question for Brian, I guess. For us to do a approval of this, is there a time limit that we have to have it done within a certain amount of time, like 30 days? Or if we don't have a meeting the next month, is that going to mess it up?
No, it's not.
Okay.
And since you've approved the request to modify the ILA and authorized Darren to sign it, then I don't think it has to come back to the board. Darren can sign electronically under our bylaws, and we're good to go.
I think, Pat, were you meaning for us to give our approval of the movement between
Yes.
funds? Yeah, that's what he's saying.
That's what.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question. My bad. I don't believe there's any time limit in the ILA. So.
Because will that cause problems for the city then if we have a 2-month lag between meetings and they need to move money?
It depends on their degree of urgency, and if they have a high degree of urgency, they can always ask the board to convene a special meeting for that purpose.
Mary, I do want to say, does that satisfy your needs?
Well, we don't have one right now, but it might be tough if there's a 2-month lag.
Well, this is future orientation, right? This is And we will have a meeting each month going forward. It's just simply a timing issue between December 14th and our meeting in January, which will be at the end of the month.
Okay. Yeah, we're fine right now.
All right. Okay, any other discussion?
Just point of clarify, there was no change in dollar amounts, correct?
Correct.
Anything else? Okay, let's vote. All those who approve this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay. Thank you for the update, Mary, and let us know if you need to move anything.
Thank you. We're going to go take this to City Council Wednesday night and let them know that you've approved it and get their approval. So,
All right.
thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mary.
All right, let's move on to agenda number 5, the financial reports. Mike, if you would walk us through the tax revenue and monthly financials.
Okay, let me get my screen back up here. And I will scroll down to the necessary items. And the first is the rebate from our sales tax. Whoop. This is real sensitive here. Okay. Everybody should be able to see that now. Again, the 5th consecutive month where we had an increase over last year instead of sinking back into the doldrums. This was fairly substantial at 13.8%, $184,000 plus dollars. Our debt service was just a little under $72,000. That's a little smaller than typical. It's around 90,000. And that's because in November, they usually make an adjustment in the amount of funds collected up to this point, because at the beginning of December, that's when they make the interest and principal payment of the 2 payments per year on the debt service. So that actually was a little smaller than typical. With the expenses, a little over $14,000, there was a little over $98,000 that went to the cash balance in our investment account. The other interesting thing, if you look here at the bottom, the total for the year is $1.6 million and change. If we have the typical December payment, and it's around $150,000, which is what our average is, we will finish up over $1.8 million, which again will be an increase over last year. And back in April, I certainly didn't figure that that's where our total would be at the end of the year. Any other questions or comments about the tax?
I would note that once again, our 184,000 is the most we've ever collected in a calendar month, ever.
That's true.
I got one of each, Mike. One, I think we're seeing that as a result of online shopping, those sales tax revenues hit local agencies, right? So I think we're seeing more people shop online and we're getting credit for that tax revenue. Did we get a copy of this? I didn't see that in my packet.
Yeah, that was sent out in the first packet. I did not send it out again prior to this meeting, this was part of what you received before the December 7th meeting.
Well, this is actually updated. The one we got back then didn't have the 184, did it, guys?
I didn't have anything with it. I was just checking, making
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a question. You know, we've got this, and it's a very long, small print because we have so many columns. Is there a reason why we need to look at all 10 years? Could we drop a few years and make the numbers bigger for old eyes to look at it?
I can certainly do that. I've typically included 10 years just so that we see the history and the trends and what happens from month to month and year to year. But if you want a smaller one, so it's bigger print, I'm happy to do that. Just let me know. I can cut it down to 5 years if you want.
What do you guys think? Do you want to see 10 or should we cut them down to 5? 6?
I'm okay with 5.
I think so.
I'm okay with 5.
I'm good with 5.
Okay.
Okay. I will make a note of that.
And remember, we lagged by 2 months, so it'll
Right.
be February before we see the December sales tax revenue. So we may set another record.
Possible. Any other questions? And we have the monthly reports, profit and loss, budget performance. There's the, this is the report where we typically show the 968 or the operations account information. Let me get it centered here. The bottom line here is, oops, I made it too big. Here we go. Expenditures of the $14,000, as I mentioned before. The third column over on the right is the annual and shows the balance in the budget. There's $49,000 against what the left and the year to date, we're under the budget as we typically are because we don't spend everything that we budget for. The fund numbers. The 977 fund it's accumulated up to $3.4 million. As I mentioned, the 968 fund, we still have a cash balance from the original deposits. Excuse me.
All right. How about any questions for Mike on either this past month or the year to date? All right. Thank you, Mike, for that update. Let's move on to our blanket vouchers. 5B, the KPFD expenses for $4,830. Can I have a motion to approve this?
Let me just make a excuse me, a brief comment. There is one other blanket voucher that I processed under my ability to approve vouchers under $1,000. This was done before the end of the month in November so that I could get the bills paid. So Comcast, our Accountability Plus, which is our, excuse me, the City of Bremerton, which is for the recording of our meetings and my expenses. Then the first one that is up for approval tonight. These are the expense that was more than $1,000 that I couldn't sign off, and that was for our legal services in the amount of $4,830. 4,000.
Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve voucher 555160 in the amount of $4,830.
The second. Thank you. Any discussion?
Who was the second? Excuse me.
John.
It's John.
John, okay.
All right, hearing none, let's vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Blanket voucher is approved. Moving on to 5C for the Paulsbo Perk invoice number 6, totaling $6,673.95. Can I have a motion to approve this voucher?
Did you
Go
just
ahead.
scroll past? Was that the backup that you scrolled past?
That
I didn't-
was
I didn't
the
see-
backup for the previous one.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
There's Brian's bill.
Okay. I haven't seen
The
those
backup.
vouchers.
The backup is here if you'd like to see that. Let's see. This is their invoice. I did not include all of the backup behind what their expense was. They do provide that to me, but I did not include that on this this pack.
And
If
this
you
is
want me to include that in the future, I can.
no. I saw the $4,800 number that it got me confused about this voucher. So this is just the grant request for the funds that we've already approved. This is their monthly draw, we'll call it.
Yeah, this is part of the 243,000 that we've approved initially. And I believe this is, if I recall, is the 6th invoice that they've given us for processing.
Okay.
It's up to around $26,000 or so.
I'll move to approve. I don't know what voucher number it is.
Second. Can I have a second, or did someone say something?
I heard second, but I didn't catch who it was.
Walt, I second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Walt.
you, Walt. Thank you, Aaron. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion, the voucher is approved. Okay, 5C, the second one is for Port Orchard. It is their first invoice that they've sent us for the money that we have already approved for them. So this is just an invoicing of that. And it is in the amount of $60,095 and 90 cents. Can I have a motion for the approval of this voucher?
So motioned.
And a second?
I'll second.
I'll second. No,
Okay, we'll give it to Pat.
Pat wins.
All right. Any discussion on this voucher?
most of this is going to the consultant and his activities. That's Rice Fergus Miller and their community assessment and preliminary design considerations. There was also a lot of work done on site selection. There were 3 different site selection, and there was a notice in the paper and on the web. They had selected the site of the existing Kitsap Bank, and that's where they're in the process of negotiating to purchase that property from the bank.
All right, any other discussion? All right, let's vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Voucher is approved. Okay, let's move on to item number 6, our new business with our Northwestern Municipal Advisors. And can we patch them in, Mike?
I'm doing that as you speak. Both except I may have promoted Stacy instead of Scott. So my apologies, Stacy. I'm going to put you back in the audience.
All right. Welcome, Scott. Welcome, Ryan. We'll give you the floor.
Terrific. Well, yes, thank you all for having us here tonight. So Scott Bauer with Northwest Municipal Advisors, and with me is my colleague, Ryan. I think we'll see a lot of the fruits of his labor as we step through the presentation. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share the presentation. And let me just, if I'm able to.
Well, let's see here. If I have to make some arrangement for that.
Yes, and I think maybe you have a copy also of the presentation.
I do, and I can put that up if you're not able to share.
Yeah, it just says that it's been disabled.
Okay. I don't see
Or if folks happen to have a printout, we could step through it that way, whichever works best for y'all.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't see a allow you to share, so I will again share my screen.
Okay.
Which does have your presentation on it.
I was going to say, Scott, that let's make sure that Mike can get that up there so that the public can see, and so that the participants in this meeting who aren't part of the board can make sure that they see this information as well visually.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for having us here tonight. So we're going to step through, I guess, this presentation. It's largely broken up into thirds, where we'll talk a little bit about the bond market. We'll address some things with the 2011 bonds and the extension of the sales tax rebate. And then we'll show you a couple of scenarios based on 2 different structures if those 2011 bonds are eventually refinanced and potentially restructured, and the extension of the sales tax. So we can step to the next slide here. So this is a look at historical interest rates, and we take this back to 1990. If we went back even farther, rates would be higher. So it's been a long trend of decreasing interest rates in the bond market. And actually, if we go to the next slide, it'll zoom in then just to the past 3 years. And this is, again, interest rates are remarkably low. We basically hit historically low interest rates in August of this year. So just prior to that, of course, you see kind of a scissoring effect between the February 20th and February 2020 and May 2020. And that's really where the impacts of COVID started to come on, and the bond market essentially seized up for a period of a week or two. And so interest rates really were unknown at that time. So I think to Mike's point earlier on sales tax revenues, standing back in the March timeframe, we certainly didn't think we'd be talking to you about historically low interest rates, which again hit us in August. There was a bit of a very small run up in interest rates, you can see there, heading into the presidential election, as a lot of issuers were trying to get their bond issues done. But now that wave has come through, interest rates actually have trickled down just a bit. So we can go on the next slide. So we just wanted to also give you a sense of, if bonds are to be issued, either by the PFD at some point or by another issuer, just a little bit about the timeline, how long it takes, and just some very basic steps. So this really assumes that everything's been teed up by the board, that somebody is actually ready to start the bonding process, and it generally takes about 12 weeks to get through it. So initially, there are documents to be put together. So there's an official statement that's put together, and that is the document that will eventually be sent around to investors that describes the security of the deal, details about the issuer. Additionally, there's generally then a bond ordinance or a bond resolution that the authorizing body would authorize. And so then those documents are put together. Eventually they are authorized, or the bond resolution ordinance is authorized. And again, we're working on documents really throughout this whole period of time. They're sent down then to a rating agency to obtain a bond rating. And then after the documents are basically in their final form, the sale has been authorized and the bond rating is in hand, then the official statement is sent out to those investors. There's a period of time for marketing the bonds, and then the bond issue is sold on a certain date, and that would be a date when essentially the interest rates and financing would be all locked in, but it does take a period of time to close a deal, and that's 2 to 3 weeks. So that's shown there at the end, and that's when then funds would be available to the entity issuing the debt. So our next portion of the presentation now will get into a look at really the 2011 bonds, refinancing of those, and then also the, what needs to happen to make sure that the extension, the 15-year extension of the sales tax gets locked in so that you can continue to collect that for the 15 additional years. And I'll turn it over here to Ryan to address these next couple slides.
Thanks, Scott, and thank you all for having us tonight. So back in 2002, the district originally issued bonds for the fairgrounds and for the convention center in Bremerton. Those were then refinanced in 2011 through the county. And so those bonds are eligible for this engrossed House Bill 1201. So the bill that was passed in 2017, that as long as a portion of those bonds are still outstanding in 2041, that the district will be allowed to continue to receive the tax rebate, the sales tax rebate. And so when looking at these particular bonds, it is important to not only to refinance them for the lower interest rates, as Scott was pointing out earlier, as the rates have continued to drop, but also to make sure that a portion of those are restructured, or at least a portion of those are restructured out until 2041 to allow yourselves to continue to receive that rebate. As soon as the bonds are paid off for those particular projects, the district can no longer receive the rebate that essentially is paying for those bonds and allows that to continue. So it's important for the district when refinancing these bonds to make sure that those are structured out through that 2041 period. Mike, do you want to?
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick question. Is there a minimum amount of the bonds that have to remain in place and be restructured? Or, I mean, whether it's a dollar threshold?
There's not necessarily a minimum, but the bonds are typically structured in $5,000 denominations. And so the examples that I'll show you here as we work through the slides do have, well, those examples I'm going to show you as just one $5,000 denomination pushed out all that way. The rest of the structures that stayed exactly the same. We'll show you another, Scott will go through another scenario where we restructure the whole the whole deal, because what happens is, and in fact, this next slide talks about it a little bit, but you'll be able to see it more visually as Scott works through the slides, is that because all of your debt is in the first portion of through 2026, that the amount of revenues and expenses, the amount of money that is available creates a pinch point for the district as far as being able to have all the money available today. So it will depend on how the district wants to kind of, have that, when the district wants to have that money available for various projects. But you do have a pinch point in the early years, because all of your debt currently is in the first 6 years as it's currently laid out. Because that's as long as you were allowed to receive the revenues in the past. So there was no reason to structure it out longer until now. So as we mentioned, yes, of course, we want to watch out for that. And then also the bonds are not callable until December 1st of 2021. So in the past, advanced refundings for tax exempt debt used to be allowed for 2 years. That's no longer the case. So if you want to have an advanced refunding, which is if you want to refund the bonds for more than 90 days from when they're callable, which is September 1st of 2021. So if you want to refund those sooner, you have to refund them with taxable bonds. If you wait until September 1st, then you can refund those with tax exempt bonds. What happens is the reason the differentiation is that tax exempt bonds, the interest that's received by the bondholder, the bondholder does not have to pay tax on those. And so therefore, if they're paying tax, you're going to have a slightly higher interest rate when the taxable bonds are issued. And so the district would essentially be paying that portion for the investor. And so,
this is really a product of federal tax law. So once you get to September 1st, 2021, or any point thereafter, this is not a problem that you'll have to worry about. It's only a problem if you, for some reason, decide that you want to refinance this debt before that date.
And there is no magic day in which you have to refinance these. It's not as though September 1st is a magic date or December 1st is a magic date. You can refinance them at any time. But for them to first be tax exempt, it would be September 1st. Anytime before that would be taxable bonds. And Mike, can we move to the next slide?
Ryan, wouldn't it be to our advantage to do it as soon after September as possible, simply to get the lower rate?
It depends. I guess it really depends on when you would need or want the money. I mean, so there's a couple different things. And so that's some of the considerations here is if rates stay exactly the same from today until September 1st, then yes, that's the case. Or if they happen to go down. But from now until September, of course, there's a lot of time in the market. So you are taking on interest rate risk by waiting now until then. So if rates were to go up, and in the next example, the next page, which we won't get to right at this moment, but there is a buffer of about 84 basis points, which is 0.84%, that if rates move by more than that between now and September, then you will essentially lose that lower interest rate that you would get today.
Thank you.
So as you just mentioned, these are some of the considerations that you're going to want to take in as you're thinking about these things. One, we talked about the tax exempt and taxable. Under interest rates, we talked about the interest rate risk, credit enhancement. So the bonds are currently issued through the county. There is not a requirement that these bonds have to be refinanced through the county. You can refinance them on your own or through another conduit issuer. But as long as there's a portion of those bonds outstanding, it doesn't matter who they're issued through. But of course, if you're issuing through the county, they have a strong rating. There could be a reason for wanting to reissue them through the county again. And then, of course, where your projections of sales tax, projected to come in and how much space you have available to be able to borrow, new money if you needed new money for additional projects as well.
Yeah, because these are county bonds, we want to be able to work with them to find out what they want to do, because there's another larger portion of the bonds that were sold that are county bonds, and a portion of it was allocated to us. But that larger bond sale was all county bonds. But we want to make sure that they don't want to retire them, pay them off entirely, because then we lose the extension of the sales tax rebate.
And to your point, Mike, when you're talking about refinancing, is like you said, do we want to do it now or later? You'll have to work with the county to, have those refunded and let them know that they're going to be callable. I'm sure that these are also on their timeline as rates have continued to come down. That they are going to see savings for those other projects that they have as well.
Yes.
So I'm sure that this is on their radar. It's just a matter of what their timeline may be and whether or not it falls in line with what the district wants to do as well.
Ryan, on that note, how long does it take? I mean, if we make a decision, whether it's tomorrow to refinance even under the taxable, or as Walt said, September 1st, we decide to refinance, how long does that process take to close?
It takes about 3 months. So it's a similar timeline to what Scott showed early on one of the earlier slides.
And Mike,
So, Ryan,
have we had any preliminary discussions with the county to ensure that they are willing to do that so we can continue receiving these funds?
We have had discussions in the past with the county. They were focused around the prospect of reselling bonds for us, which they had indicated that they were not in favor of doing that. We have not pursued beyond that about what to do with the existing bonds and their treatment. So that's a conversation that we need to start now so that we can have it resolved well before September.
And with those discussions, you want to make sure that restructuring portion that you have, at least that portion pulled out. It's not going to be a straight refunding as the way it's set up now. You will want that one piece pulled out through 2041 too, and which will be an important part of making sure that you're involved with the county. And of course, we've worked with multiple, doing conduit issues like this in the past. And so we're glad to work with the county as well to make sure that your best interests are at heart when looking at these deals.
So Ryan, Walt Draper here. This was all one bond issue. Is our portion of it divisible from the counties? Can we refund our piece of it and they retire their part of it, or do we both have to do the same thing?
A portion of the bonds can be refunded. It's not all or nothing. But they just have to make sure that the call notices are put in so that the bondholders know that their bonds are no longer going to be available.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so your portion could be separated from theirs and remain outstanding even if they wanted to refinance the portion that's for other projects that the county did at the same time. But again, I guess the emphasis.
Yeah, I'm sure that the county has no interest in extending their portion of the money out until 2041, but I don't know. This was originally sold as an LTGO 26-year bond back in 2005. Or no, 2011, sorry.
And what does the difference in our funding capacity change if they're not willing to use their rating and we have to use our own?
And we can run those scenarios, but it would certainly be a consideration because we'd want to make sure that there's enough, revenue headroom for you to do that in addition to funding your other projects. Now, you can do that, but as you use up more of your funding for other projects, then again, we just have to see how tight does that get, because it could be an impact.
And so on this, so what we're doing is we have an outstanding $3.8 million So if we look at the taxable refunding, you'll see that the rate, as we noticed earlier, was slightly higher at 1.9 as opposed to the 1.49, which is the current refunding. And like we talked about earlier, if rates don't change from now until September 1st, you have a buffer of 0.84% to achieve the same savings today as you would in September.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you're looking at just this slide, we'd show our clients if they're considering an advance refunding or waiting, it does come a little bit down to those bottom lines. What's my savings now? What's my potential savings later? And how much is the sensitivity? But here again, it's, I think you have bigger considerations to look at than simply the bottom line savings number. And that being, the potential restructuring of the debt, if wanted, at the very least, $5,000 has to go out there, and then who's going to do it?
Correct.
And so this is kind of the overview of the refinancing. Are there any other questions before I pass it off to Scott to show a couple of examples of the refinancing and then what that allows you to do today with money that could be available for other projects?
Okay, well, we'll take a look then at a couple of scenarios here. And maybe what I'll do is step through a little bit slowly on this scenario. The next one will be similar, but I'll show you the key differences. So as far as assumptions go, of course, we have a couple of assumptions listed there across the top. We're assuming that first column there, the potential sales tax rebate revenue, that they grow at 2% in this example, and that your expenses next to it grow at 1%. Now, we are starting here at a much lower baseline. I think we took 12% off of 2019's figures. So we are starting it conservatively, especially in light of your actual 2020 receipts. So that's, depending on future scenarios, that's adjustments we can make. But certainly what you're looking at here should be somewhat conservative from a revenue standpoint. So we have, again, the sales tax rebate revenue, the expenses, and then so we take the one minus the other, and that's the balance that you have available to pay debt service. In the middle there, you have your existing 2011 bonds. So here we've assumed a refinancing, but largely have kept the same shape, except for extending out that one maturity to lock in the sales tax rebate. So then again, taking that minus the balance available for debt service less the 2011 bonds then provides how much funds are available for other projects. And so if we try to bond all of those, as much revenues as we possibly can, that tells us then in the yellow off to the right, how much would that be worth? So if an issuer were taking those revenues, they were rated in the A category, and we were using current interest rates that are about 0.5% higher than right now, there would be about $17.2 million of project proceeds. Now you can see in this case, looking at potential future debt service and the unused revenues, that we're not actually able to utilize all the revenues, so there would be some left over. Because again, if we tried to bond all of those revenues out there, then we wouldn't have enough funding in the early years to pay the debt service. So that's a bit of a constraint with the 2011 bonds. Now we do take on a sensitivity, and that's just below where you see the yellow. If our sales tax growth, if we assume it at 0%, so no growth on sales tax, it basically stays at that $1.5 million, then the resulting proceeds are about $15.5 million. If instead we grow it at 4%, then total proceeds are about $19.6 million. So that's, again, largely keeping the 2011 bonds similarly shaped, and then all the other assumptions that I just mentioned. Now, if we go to the next slide.
Can I jump in real fast?
Please.
So I'm looking at our operating expenses for the PFD. Mm-hmm. And should that 20 20 number, should that match what our actual operating budget is for the years?
I think there, again, we took a 19 and decreased it by 9.5%. So these were just some opening scenarios. As you say, I think we can make some adjustments, but we did decrease things out the gate.
Okay, yeah, because we know the operating expenses are actually going to go up. So
Yeah, and we're actually about, I think, 220,000 for next year, aren't we?
That's the budget, yes, but
I think it's 236 for next year. Yeah.
typically we're running $10,000 to $15,000 below our budget number by the time we get to the end of the year. Mainly because of other expenses varying, but non-utilization of the full amount of the $25,000 event fund.
Yeah, so we've got 236,550, I think, for 21 right now.
So if we, Ryan, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, as you can see, as Scott moves on to the next page, you'll see.
Don't go to the next page, Lisa. So to kind of look at the bottom line is the money we would have to spend on projects would be, under this assumption, the bond proceeds, the 17,171,000, plus the unused revenues at 9.8, almost 10. So right around 27 million. Is that correct math?
Well, right. So you basically would get 17.2 million upfront for projects, and then all unused revenues then I guess could be used on a pay-as-you-go basis if folks want funding
over time.
Correct.
41, we could spend $27 million.
Right. 17.2 upfront, and then the balance, the 9.8 over a period of 20 years.
Gotcha. 15 years. 20 years from now.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So this scenario is basically the same thing, same assumptions as we had on the prior scenario. But what we've done here is on the 2011 bonds, we said, let's just stretch it out to 2041. We'll make it level debt service so that payments are essentially equal each and every year. So yeah, we're looking at that right in the middle. So that allows us to actually then bond for more funds. Of course, if just looking singularly at the 2011 bonds, obviously when you stretch out debt, it leads to higher total payments. But in this case, it releases the constraint that's in the early years and allows you to basically bond for all the funds if that's something that you would want to do. So on the right-hand side, the total proceeds based on this scenario rises to $22.2 million. And you see, again, the sensitivity, 0% growth, we're at just shy of $17 million, but at 4% growth, we're close to $30 million.
Can you just explain to me, because I'm not a numbers guy, why the unused revenues at 500,000, 599 versus in the previous scenario was at 9 million?
Yes. So on the earlier scenario, we're simply not able to bond for as much. So in that scenario, we bonded for $5 million less. And so then that has unused revenues left over that could go to other projects. But that's really largely the difference between the two scenarios. We bonded for less. We used up less revenue from both a project and a payment of interest standpoint. In this scenario, we're able to bond for more, which essentially uses up all the revenues.
And a lot of these scenarios really depend on the timeline of when you need the money. So, as we looked at the previous scenario, there's a lot of additional funds left in the back end, like you said, in the last 15 years, Walt, you mentioned, whereas this is if you need the money today, you would want to draw out the 2011 debt in some way to at least get capacity to be allowed to borrow more money today.
So we get $22 million, $22 million today instead of 17 million today.
So it's really the timeline on when the district needs the money to be able to kind of phase those in appropriately. Right. And of course, us structuring, trying to structure the debt in a way that allows you to have that money available when you need it.
Okay.
And of course, like we said, borrowing it today and not knowing, 5 years down the road where rates are going to be, of course, borrowing the money is going to cost differently then as well.
So I think on the next slide, I think we just had listed out, I think the spreadsheet from Mike showing, I think the funding requested by various entities. So I think the 4% growth scenario we just showed you, I guess, gets closest right now to the funding requested. But as I said, I think, our main takeaways, I believe, is to refine the scenarios a little more so that, maybe we're figuring out, who do we think is actually going to bond for it, who is taking funding on a pay-as-you-go basis, and get that plugged into a model and provide that to you. I think our last slide is just a
So I guess I have a question on this slide. As it's, I see ILA commitments down here. My understanding, the Port Orchard ILA is at the full $12 million, and that's the only one that has the full project request in it?
Correct.
Okay. So there are some different assumptions on this particular one as well, because we see funding requested.
Yeah, this is the committed funding shown for phase 1 for the ILA. And correct, the funding requested was 12 million, which was approved by the board. That's the maximum that we can allow or pay for the Port Orchard one. And this was just to indicate what the initial phases of each of the projects which are committed at this point through the ILAs, not the total commitment.
John, I would say that as I think we all heard a month or two ago from Kitsap County and from Poulsbo, the requests that they've made are those numbers that Mike's put in the funding request. It's just that Port Orchard was in a situation where they needed full approval of that entire amount for the bank and for other partners to be willing to move forward with the project. And so we had to make that commitment of saying yes to everything, whereas we've said yes to the other 2 projects for Poulsbo and Kitsap County, but we are doing it in phases, where they don't ask for all of it at the time. But it is their assumption, I would say, that they will be coming back, and even though they've only asked for 1.7698 million now, they'll be coming back to ask for the rest of that, which was in their proposal when we approved the project.
Okay. Because I was under the understanding, I think I asked that question 2 meetings ago. Do we have the assumption, are we operating on the assumption that we're fully funding the request ask as opposed to just what we're only an ILA for? So that does change some things in my mind.
And John, in our prioritization process, Port Orchard was number 1. So, I think that the feeling across the board is if we're going to fund any project fully, that would be the first one we would take.
Okay. And we're not in, I guess I want to fully understand this, as everybody's saying it, that the funding requested, that line there is what we are operating on. That eventually we would want to fund all 3 of those at that capacity, if able to.
But no commitment on our part, right? Other than Port Orchard.
There is no commitment, but I think that is a fair thing to say, that it's an assumption that this is a project that we've approved and this is the amount that they've asked for, even though we haven't committed that exact amount to them yet.
So when we're talking about the ride park, I think what we did for the ILA was for certain parts of it. Are you saying you think that 8.6 is what we had planned on paying and go to the rest of them, the rest of the sections too?
Is that question for me, Aaron?
I think like John, I was kind of a little surprised too, because I thought we had committed to what we committed on the ILAs without promising anything beyond that yet.
I think that's true as well. I think it's true that we have out clauses in all of our ILAs, even with Port Orchard along the way too. If there are problems that arise, we are not committed to simply give 12 million no matter what happens. So that there are outs on each of those ILAs. But with these projects, with all three of them, they can't complete the projects. It was at least our understanding or made known to us that they are depending on the money that we are committing for the ask that they have in order to carry this out. And so we're taking it step by step because that's how they have requested it.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Darren.
Either.
I don't think the county is counting on getting 8.672 million from us. I think they'd like to, and they're going to ask for more, but I don't think they're counting on getting it.
Yeah, because I thought what we had done at the time was we didn't know how much money we had, which is why, as you said, we committed to Port Orchard in full so they could move their project forward, but also why we only committed to beginning phases on anything else. So I don't think we've agreed or even may have left them with the assumption that the money's going to be there for the rest, because we didn't know that.
But I think the ranking makes them believe that they're going to be next in line for the money, like Paulsbo over number 4, 5, or 6, or 7. So I think they do have a little bit of an assumption they're going to get the money since they're higher ranked than other people that are asking.
I think they have a correct assumption that they're probably going to get some more money, but not the full funding requested necessarily.
I think you could say that everything that has been said is true. Because of the exact situation we're in, where we don't know exactly how much money we're going to have. And so that all of those things were moving numbers. But I do think implicitly in all of our discussions, they made proposals for the larger amounts. And so I think that they would, they will be coming back and asking us for those larger amounts. It's just a sequence of time. They're going to finish phase 1 for the ride park, and then when they get to the STO part for the park, they'll come and ask us for that money.
So I guess this gives us the opportunity to have a strategy to figure out how we're going to meet all that at this time. And I guess my question then back to our financial advisors then would be, is there a third scenario where the KPFD does not bond any of this, but what does our cash flows look like by just refinancing the existing debt structure? I guess I would say, what do we call that? Scenario 1, without taking out those bonds, so that we just use the incoming, the additional revenue to debt service the rest of these projects if we ask them to bond themselves and we secure the debt service.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially what scenario 1 is showing. It's showing that there's revenues available, and it's not necessarily the PFD issuing debt and providing the 17.2, but it could be thought of as you've provided a stream of revenues to entity A, B, or C. And again, under our assumptions is that they're an A-rated type entity, and that they are bonding for it. So, the collective could bond up to the $17.2 million given our assumptions that we have here. To the extent that they're rated better, perhaps they can bond a little bit more. To the extent that interest rates are lower, they could bond a little bit more.
John, this has been the point that I've tried to bring forward throughout our process here, is that if we don't bond, if we simply push out that 5,000 to the very end and we allow those tax revenues to come in year after year, that we will have so much more money to fund more projects. If we do take the money now, we are only going to be able to fund one project now and maybe a few parts of other projects. But if we do allow that revenue stream to come in over the entire time and we don't bond beyond that 5,000, then we'll be able to fund at least 3 projects, or we would hope to. And so it seems like a no-brainer to me. The assumption, though, that you have to have within that is that we're telling Port Orchard and Kitsap Bank, and we're telling the city of Paulsbo, and we're telling the county that we're not going to have the money for you up front, but we will provide it on this kind of a revenue stream basis. And those are the details we would need to work out. But if we do that, we put the bonding or the money that they need up front in their, it's their project. They can figure that out. And yes, we will be a funding mechanism for you where, however we work it out, we will give you $1.5 million in 2024 starting in 2027 or 2028, or partitioning it however the projects need it. But it does seem to me philosophically that it is better for us to do more projects, and by not bonding, that allows us to do that.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, if we were to show you a scenario where instead we say the PFD is exclusively going to bond and not provide any, the amount that you could would be lower. We need to have, if the PFD were to do it because of the sales tax revenue pledge, we would need to make sure you have what's called coverage, so an amount of revenue available over and above what you would expect your debt service to be. So if no other questions, or we can go to the summary slide, and happy to continue to answer any questions that you may have.
I do have one other question about it. So, and we have always looked at if we don't bond. You had talked about the constriction coming up on cash flow. If we don't bond, are we still okay through that constriction?
Well, sure. So if we go back a couple slides, you'll see that it's in that it's really in the 2021 year.
Okay.
So on its own, let's go back one more to scenario one, just to show the scenario one. You have $594,000, almost $595,000. But as you see, if you want to bring on the debt, those early payments are just interest payments. Those are when you see the 594,665 repeated a couple of times, that's just interest payments during those years, because you couldn't even fit a principal payment in there, because to maximize the amount you would want, if you wanted to borrow it all now or have all the money available now, you have just this tight point of only $324 available left over at the end of 2021.
Okay.
So you have essentially $600,000 available for next year.
Okay.
Say that again. So we're saying that's if we take all the money up front and not do it over time, correct?
So if you wanted the money, let's say this in 2021, keeping the same structure with only bringing out that one $5,000 denomination, you have about $600,000 available. And so in those early years, we essentially, the way it had to be structured was that we ended up putting all the principal in the later years, because the early years could only eat up that interest to be able to fit in that essentially that tight spot in 2021. Whereas if we drew it out, then that opens up, to give you $1.5 million to allow you to have more money available if you needed it all next year.
Okay.
Did we go to the summary? I don't want to rush anybody on if there are any more questions right now.
Scott, why don't you go to the summary, but I'm sure we'll come back to you
Absolutely.
with more questions.
Okay, no problem. So I think what we showed you today, in some of our upfront slides, that interest rates are historically low. you'll have to do something with the 2011 bonds. I mean, we showed you one end where you take it all the way out, level debt service out to 2041, and another where you merely take $5,000 out to 2041. Something has to happen to make sure that you can lock in that sales tax revenue. You know, the decisions I think are yet to be made on, you know, who does it, the county, the PFD, some other entity, and do you do it now or do it later? But I think, you know, what I certainly don't want you to take away from tonight is that there is any sort of rush from a market standpoint that you have to do it now. You have to lock in those savings. As we've said, I think there's more important decisions to be made, and I think it's more important that you make those, you know, in due course and not feel rushed that you have to refinance something. But, you know, you do need to be made aware that, you know, keep close coordination with the county just to be sure that something doesn't happen that would not be in your interest as far as securing those sales tax revenues. And then lastly, what we showed you was, you know, given a stream of revenues and different shapes on the 2011 bonds, you know, how much, what's the value of that bonding amount? Again, we can run many different other scenarios given different assumptions, but based on those, you know, I think we showed you kind of a range of bonding amount and upfront project amount. So I will pause there right now.
So as I'd like to frame it, and I hope this is helpful for the board, I think there are three different decisions that we make in this presentation. And I don't think they are decisions that we need to make tonight, but I'd like to get kind of a sense of where we're at as a board, and then, hey, let's stew on it, you know, for a month and a half. We have that time to do it, and then come back and maybe we can formalize these thoughts so that we can give direction to our advisors for how we're going to move forward, and we can begin to work with the county on that. So the three variables that I see all are about, do we want more money now, or do we want more money overall? And the first one is, are we going to do this before September 1st or after, which gives us the tax exempt. And so if we go tax exempt, it would appear, we don't know what interest rates will do, but it would appear that we would have more money overall if we are willing to wait until after September 1st. The second one is, are we going to level out the debt that we have right now, or are we going to pay it off under, I think it was scenario 1, as we've proposed, and then just put that $5,000 down at the very end of it, which gives us roughly about $2 million more, I think, as I look at the numbers, to spend over the life of the 20 years. And then third, the really big question for us is, are we going to bond, or are we going to do allocated funding? And the difference there is, depending on what scenario you look at, it's either 17 million now, or 19 million now, or it's, excuse me, it's either 27 million overall, or it's a little less, 22 million overall, or it's 36, or I don't have that screen in front of me anymore. But what the, let's go up to scenario 1, because I think that's the best one to look at, which would give us 32.5 million overall to spend under that scenario, versus 17 million. So putting my cards on the table, I think it's better to wait until after September 1st and go tax exempt. I think it's better for us to not take our debt and spread it out over the 20 years, but to pay it off so that we have $2 extra million over the span. And I think it's better to go with allocated funding, where we allow the different projects to bond if they need to, or come up with other financing arrangements, whatever they want, but that we would supply that revenue stream to them, which would give us so much more capital to help with. So that would be how I see it. But other questions, and does that make sense? And how do you see it?
I'll chime in here, Darren. I did have one quick question for Scott and team. Is that we were talking about 84 basis points earlier, and that's the difference between refinancing before September and after, correct?
Correct. So that difference is if rates stay the same between now and then, if rates rose by more than 0.84, then you would have less, I guess you would have a higher interest rate than it is today. I guess
Now,
you'd be paying more.
I get
So
to play in
risk
rates.
of,
I get to play in rates a little bit in my day job, but I track treasuries, not the bond market. I know they're interrelated, and we've had a little bit of up and down recently. But we pay you for your professional opinion. Do we think that we should be pricing in rate risk?
I mean, they, like we were showing right now, like they're at historic lows. We've continued to see them come down, over the course of history, but there are certainly blips throughout a year that do happen. What is the next, does the vaccine not work? Do we, is everyone taking the vaccine now? And in September, we find out that, everyone's getting sick again. These are the things that we just don't know about that might cause those rates really to skyrocket, or something that would be unpredictable that, that might come up in that period of time. Certainly if, I would like to think rates will stay where they are. I feel very comfortable. If you were to tell me what the rate was going to be tomorrow, I'd feel comfortable getting you within a few basis points. But looking ahead 9 months is sometimes can be a challenge.
Yeah, and frankly,
your crystal ball has gotten more cloudy.
And I think if we looked at the slide that has the savings, frankly, what we try to take is, what's the net present value savings? So if you could take all those cash flow savings and put it in your pocket today, what's it worth? What we presented on the earlier slide was that, it's $91,000, and that's about 2.5% as a size of, the debt that you're refinancing. That, frankly, is at the low end. So I guess, again, if you were just looking to do this purely as savings, I don't know whether you would be clamoring to do a refunding that would net you that kind of savings at this point. So
I think I agree. So
yeah, so even if interest rates go up, they can go up, as we said, 84 basis points, and that's where it would then be equal between doing it now or doing it later. I do want to mention, though, when we're talking taxable versus tax exempt, this question only impacts the portion that we're talking about on the 2011 bonds. It doesn't impact if you want to do funding of new projects, either the PFD does, or again, you're providing money to somebody else and they're going to bond. As long as the project is tax exempt eligible, then it can be sold with tax exempt bonds. So it's just this portion of the 2011 bonds, and it's only until September 1 that we are discussing taxable versus tax exempt.
thank you. Darren, I think I would agree with a lot of your assessment in there. I would tend to want to wait for the refinancing, and I also would probably be in favor of maximizing our dollars as best as possible.
Darren, I think I would agree with a lot of what you're saying, at least in terms of the timing for September 1st. I guess my question is needing to know what, frankly, the need will be. I mean, if these projects that we've already committed to are saying that they need the money up front and need some additional, we're saying, well, if over time we can spread out the money, let's get more money. I agree with that. If a lot of the development projects need more money up front that we don't have, and so then we do need to bond or at least have them bond, that I think that's what also might drive the decision on which option we go with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there has to be flexibility with that, Phil. But I think if we ask any of the projects, so just take away anybody's name that's associated with one, do you need the money now or do you need the money later? I'm pretty confident everybody can make a case for we need the money now for our project. And so we are in a position of being the ones to give the money. And so it's kind of like, well, would you like $12 million? Great. We will have it for you in this structured revenue stream for you. And now you can plan off of that, because I'm sure every single one of those projects also would rather have the $12 million and figure out how they're going to do their financing on their own than not have the $12 million. And so I feel like we're in a position where we're not trying to say to people, hey, we'll take care of the project for you. We're coming along to create public facilities that will benefit our community and will draw in more tax revenue over these years.
Right, but I guess isn't it also maybe, the question to ask them is, do you want, I'll again make up number now, do you want 7 million now, or do you want 12 million over time? And one project may say we'll take 7 million now and forgo the other 5, or the others, another project may say, no, we're so early in the preliminary stages, we want the full 12 million, and if it takes us years to get, that's fine with our timetable too. So that it's just a question of, if we're trying to figure out maximizing revenue without really knowing what the need is. I mean, yeah, of course, everyone says, give me the full amount in cash tomorrow. That's fine. But if we approached it like, all right, here's what the options are. Do you want the full amount, but it's going to take you a number of years? Or do you want a reduced amount? Because that may be, what they want. And then that helps us decide which way we go as well.
If I can just say something, Spike, if you want to move to the next slide, scenario 2, I think it might help a little bit. Although we're saying that the size of the project can be $22 million, you're actually paying out $30 million because you're including the interest. If they needed to borrow the money today, you're still paying them $30.5 million. But the project is really only going to fund of principal, or of the project size is the 22.2 million. So I just want to make sure clarifying the fact that you're still giving all the money available, just that only a portion of it's going to be to pay off interest and the other portions to pay off principal, whether you're borrowing it or they're borrowing it. I guess that's the thought. So if they had to borrow for money for projects today, they'd be able to borrow 22 million, and then you'd still be paying them 30.5 million to help pay for that interest portion.
So that's a really good point. So when we're talking about the maximum that we think we'd be able to fund, really the number goes down to 22 million on this, correct?
For project size, but that would also include interest costs as well.
Yeah, based
Right,
on these assumptions, that's right. If you provided them the full revenue stream that you see here, basically the potential dollars available for allocation,
right?
If you committed those dollars to one or multiple entities, it would be $22.2 million is what they could bond for, essentially.
Right,
Given
and that's
this scenario.
And that's what they could use to build with.
Correct.
And then the balance of it is just interest because it's getting paid off under time.
Correct.
Okay, so we're not really looking at funding $30 million worth of construction. We're looking at funding 22 million of construction.
That's right. And what I'm trying to separate us from is from the understanding that it would be our responsibility to pay off their interest, right? I don't think that's our responsibility. Each of these different entities are choosing to build a project, and I don't think that it is our responsibility to pay the interest for them. Even if they were the ones to do it, we would still say it's 12 million, or we would still say it's 8,600,000, whatever the number is. And that is what we offer to you.
So if we talk to the Paulsbo and the county, whether they're willing or able to bond and this on their own and have us make the payments?
I thought we had. Is that your understanding, Darren?
No, I don't believe so. I think this has been theoretical for a year and a half, 2 years, as Bill, former board member, and myself both thought this is a way that we can potentially fund 3 projects or 4 projects or whatever the number will be, rather than 1 project or 2 projects. And so we have not had that conversation with Kitsap Bank and with Port Orchard. We have not had that conversation with Paulsbo. We have not had that conversation with Kitsap County.
Well, for Port Orchard with the ILA, don't they get the money whether they want to bond it themselves or not? Are we obligated to give them that 12 million no matter what?
Go ahead, Mike.
No, there's no commitment at this point in the ILA. Both Port Orchard, even though we've committed 12 million up front, that's still contingent on whether or not it's going to be viable and supportable, and whether the community is going to support it.
Right, but if all that comes out to be, do we owe them the 12 million right away? We can't tell them to wait or bond it themselves and we'll pay.
If they jump through all their hoops, they should be able to get that money, as far as I read the ILA.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
If they get through all the steps to the point where everything is go and they've met all the conditions in the ILA, and they say, we want to start construction the middle of next year, whatever next year that is, then yes, we would be able to negotiate with them. Are you going to be able to sell bonds and we pay back the principal over the next 15 years?
I don't know if we can negotiate that. I thought we already had a deal with them. That's kind of what I was, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought it was a done deal, that if they did all this, they got $12 million.
Brian, if you would like to speak to this at all from the legal agreement, my understanding, and let's get this firmed up by the next meeting, if we can't do it right now, that funding of the $12 million, that number has been set, but that the funding stream for when it happens or how it happens is not set. There's been no, I don't believe there's any language of that 12 million would be payable at this point in time.
Yeah, Darren, I think your summary is quite accurate. So the PFD did commit to a maximum fund of $12 million for the reasons you stated a little bit earlier, which was kind of to save the project, or show there was commitment so that the other partners wouldn't walk away. But as Mike then said, there's a series of tasks or milestones built into the ILA, and they all have numbers attached to them, and those numbers and those tasks are spread out over a 5 or 6 year time frame, and the funding is always dependent on them checking the milestones at each one of those, or checking off the box at each one of those milestone events. So do they get the 12 million? Yes, it's never a lump sum. It's phased as they go forward, in terms of them meeting their requirements. As to the particulars of, is somebody going to bond, somebody not going to bond, we didn't get that far in the ILA, because again, where they are in their project is so preliminary that no one really knew how the total funding was going to play out.
Brian, what does the language say though? Like, so we said $12 million. Is that $12 million got to hit their account? It obviously costs us more to produce $12 million than just $12 million. Yeah. Who are we responsible for that difference? Are they expecting a full 12, or are they going to expect whatever the difference is minus what we're going to have to pay out to bond this or to cover that debt service?
They're expecting $12 million.
Total.
Yeah, total.
By the time, so there will be approximately $2.5 or $3 million spent in the initial phases, to the point where if they get to the point where they're going to commit to construction, we're obligated for only whatever the balance of $12 million toward the cost of construction. If that construction is $15 million, then they have to cover $6 million, and we do $9 million.
Well, I get that, but we don't have $12 million in the bank. It's going to cost us money to get that. And then we also have to take that into account for our cash flows.
Correct.
So John, I've got the ILA for Port Orchard in front of me. And again, I think this is something that we should give everybody time to go back to the ILA, make sure that what we're saying is all 100% accurate. But task number 7 in the ILA says this. It says that task is to secure funding for construction and term financing as an alternative to the KPFD issuing bonds to cover the remaining $9.5 million commitment. And so even it's worded in there that that's the task that we have to do for that final 9.5. But it is task 7, and then there are sub points off of that of committing a percentage of that sales tax and identifying the debt issuing. So that is specified, but let's let everybody go back to that before the next meeting and make sure that everybody in his agreement of what this says.
So I want to circle back to something you said, Darren, so I understand. John was just saying, there's interest involved no matter who bonds one way or the other. So if we're giving, we'll say that Port Orchard does a straight $12 million bond to do this, that we're only paying back $12 million and that they're absorbing the cost of the interest.
Correct. That we are a funding entity. So that's what we're doing. And if you'd like the $12 million, this is how we will fund that to you. And we promise that we will. The reason we're doing it this way, again, is to be able to do 3 projects instead of 1.5, or whatever those numbers would be. Right. But we can do much more by doing it this way. And all of those entities too have a better bond rating than we do as well, is my understanding, with Port Orchard, with the county, with Paulsbo.
Yeah, and I think, if I just may say something, I think if you provide them essentially $12 million revenue stream, then obviously they'll be able to borrow less than $12 million. So I don't know whether it be misconstrued that they're not getting the $12 million, but again, if you provide them $12 million over a period of time, it'll be something less that they can bond. If they're, yeah.
But I think that's their issue to resolve. If they want to bond for 15 million and we cover their debt service until such time as our accumulated debt service payment to Port Orchard reaches 12 million, and then they've got to suck it up for the remaining money.
For a point of clarity, we have been using paying their debt service, and what Darren is talking about is paying back the principal and the principal only, not paying their debt service, because their debt service includes the interest payments.
No, I would want to say that they can choose how to allocate the money in any way they want. We're just saying this is the revenue stream that we will agree to, paying you the total of the 12 million over time. And they can choose whether they want to use that to pay interest or principal or however they want to do it. But let's, this is why I wanted to say, let's talk about these 3 issues and then let's think about it. Give it some time, digest it. But any other questions on, I do think it's good to wait until after September 1st. There's no project where we need to have money now. And, as no one can predict the future, but an 84% rise and the amount of money that we're saving by doing it earlier, it is not something that it is going to move us to do it quicker. And then secondly, the same thing of having that 5,000 because I'd like to begin to approach the county and say, we'd like to set it up where we can do this 5,000 payment at the end. And we know that we have to refinance these bonds and push them out to 2041, no matter what. So we can do that, and we can start the work on that by putting that 5,000 at the end, because we save $2 million in interest over the life of it by not pushing that principal out. So those are the first two things, and then this larger question of bonding versus allocated funding. But I think it would be great to give all the projects that we're working with clarity for understanding what is the amount of money that we expect, and how will we be structuring those payments so that they can, begin planning on that understanding. Any comment or question off of any of those, or anybody want to take a counter position though on the tax exempt for going before September 1st, or not doing the 5,000 at the end, but pushing out the money evenly? All right.
Well, I agree with that.
And I would just say, I think we should move with expediency with talking with the county, because that really does define whether or not we can have
I vote for that.
further revenue.
Well, if you'd
I
like
don't
to
get a vote, but I vote for that.
Okay. Well then,
And then
is the treasurer, Meredith Green, the person that we need to talk with, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. So I will speak with Meredith and work with Scott to be able to have those conversations to see what our options are. Okay, any other questions for Scott or Ryan?
Do we have their contact information for follow-up questions?
Yes, I can provide that. Certainly I have it, but I'll provide it to anybody that wants it.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Ryan and Scott.
Thank
Thanks
you very much for your presentation.
All right, we enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And happy to take any questions that you might have, and I'm sure we'll see you soon in the future. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Night. All right, let's move on to item number 7, ongoing business. First, approving the resolution 0220 for 2021 meeting schedule. Mike, can you put that up on the screen?
I will put that up.
Just as a reminder, I've got another Zoom meeting at 7:30 that was pre-scheduled before we had to move this one. So I may have to drop off here in fairly short order.
Well, let's do this real quick. And I know that Walt is in a similar situation where he'd like the meeting to have been done about 14 minutes ago by my count, Walt. So here's the schedule in front of you. Can I have a motion to approve it for our 2021 slate?
I motion to adopt this resolution.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. All right. Resolution is approved. Now for our budget, item B, approving the proposed 2021 budget. You see that before you, and we've had that in our packets. Can I have a motion to approve our 2021 budget?
Move approval of the proposed 2021 budget.
Thank you, Walt. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Pat. Any discussion on the budget? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the budget for 2021, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the budget has been approved. Now to item number 3, the Port of Bremerton Phase 3 discussion.
Hey, Darren, I'm
yes.
sorry, very quickly, going back to that schedule for this next year, it may be a moot point because of COVID, but I do notice that the May date has I didn't see what the asterisks are because I can't see it on the screen, but the May 31st is Memorial Day. I don't know.
We'll move that for sure. No one wants to get together on the evening of Memorial Day.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Thank you, Phil. And Mike, would you make a note of that and just move it to the 24th regardless, whether it's Zoom or whether it's not?
Okay.
And if that means we can't have that building, we'll adjust. But that's noted, and we'll make sure that meeting date gets changed, and we'll notify everybody when that settles out for what it is. Item 7C, Port of Bremerton Phase 3 discussion. We've had a number of discussions with this. What Jim Rothland has asked for is that if we can just give them a simple up or down on the 1.4 million request. And what they prepared was this sheet that I guess attachment that all of you received, stating this would be the benefit of the regional sporting event area, and this is how it would benefit the community event, or that the community event center is part of that, and that these are for the final design fees and construction document fees of $1.4 million. And so after we would approve this, we would still need to continue to go through the ILA and create a new ILA and have Mike and Brian work with the port to create that ILA. And so we don't have the specifics, but simply an up or down on the 1.4 million for the Port of Bremerton for these purposes.
So
are there any questions?
I guess the question is, can I make a motion to
yes,
fund
please.
it?
Yes.
Okay. So Mike, if you'll scroll that back to that one page where we can just see the capture, and at the bottom of the page, it's got it. I move that we fund the Port of Bremerton project for the amount of $1,439,363 for their design and construction document fees.
And do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Aaron. Now discussion.
This is Walt. Is the idea still that the port would fund this up front and we would establish some kind of repayment schedule between us and the port?
Yes, and I'll get some of the port guys in here if you'll allow me to stop sharing for a moment.
While he's doing that, I'll go ahead and continue discussion along this. I think I support, as long as no bonding or anything is required and they're flexible upon those repayment terms.
I would like to speak against it, and for two different reasons. One is, as we just saw from our municipal advisors, they gave us a total of 32 million that we would have if we did allocated funding. So if we don't bond and we had the most money that we could have from the extending the 15 years for this sales tax rebate, the most we could have would be enough to fund exactly what these first three projects ask for. So by giving money to the port right now, we are for sure taking money away from either the county and Heritage Park, which was ranked above them, or we're taking it away from the city of Paulsbo. That has to be an assumption just by the math, that if we only expect 32 million, if we don't bond and do the allocated funding and use all the different things that they just gave us to have the most money we could get under the conditions that they put through, that the most that we could get was 32 million. So to take $1.4 million, it seems wrong to me for other projects to come and ask for smaller amounts when we do have an understanding that these other projects do want more. It's just a timing issue. It's just who gets to the table first. And I think we set up a bad precedent for having all the projects now continue to come to us repeatedly for getting their project funded.
So we were looking at, we had talked about cash we have available now, not cash going forward into the new year projects, right? So we had talked about with not moving forward with the $500,000 on the artificial turf. Mike, what was the dollar amount that our financials have that we could make this decision for this project on right now?
That's still somewhat of a moving target, but we have, as I indicated earlier, $3.4 million in the cash reserves right now. As we've seen from the our reports that we can expect, someone perhaps north of $1.8 million next year, with $850,000 in debt service. So we're going to have money running around. The problem is identifying exactly when a project is going to need money and when we're going to have to make that commitment. We still don't know exactly what that is. Up on the screen, this is something else that I'd calculated, because what Bremerton, what the port had asked for was in repayment of $1.4 million over 5 years with 3% interest, which is slightly more than almost $50,000 more than the amount. What we had proposed is $1.4 million over 10 years, but no interest, that they absorb any of the bonding costs. So here's, again, two scenarios of something that would take upwards of almost $300,000 a year over 5 years, as opposed to something less than $144,000 a year over 10 years. So the $144,000 a year is less than 10% of our income. But since we don't know exactly what the numbers are going to be for Port Orchard in 2023 or 2024, whether they're going to come back for construction, it could be 2024 or 2025. We don't know. So it's still a matter of what you want to make a commitment for. And
Right.
you have to make it work one way or another.
Which is why I was talking about cash that we currently have in hand, not looking forward to 21, 22, 23. That's why I asked, what is it now that we're not committed to the $500,000 for the artificial turf and whatnot? Looking at the financials right now, if you can read them for me and tell me what we've got available if we wanted to write a check right today for something.
Mike, do you have that schedule? You had, I think, last meeting or the meeting before, you put a schedule up that showed the money that was available right now and the commitments that.
Yes, I have that. I'll have to go get it. It's not in this packet right now. So just.
Why don't you get that, and then let's continue other discussion amongst the board.
Yeah, I have a question for Brian, I think. So since this is a public-private partnership, the money that would be spent on this, how do we know it's going to be just used for, I guess, designing the public portion, not the private? Does that make sense? We can't fund any of the private portion, right?
That is correct. The proposal has to show how the money is being spent on the public portion of the project.
So when you're funding design, for instance, parking lots and walkways that are used for both public and private, how does that work?
I have two comments. One, I'll bounce over to Mike because we had to go through that with the last ILA where they asked for a lot of design fees, and Mike kind of parsed through like what was appropriate, what was inappropriate. So part of that is that. The other part is, jumping back to discussions from a couple of years ago about what we could fund that made sure we weren't funding a private portion. Is we talked about funding infrastructure and physical improvements that could be used on the port property that could be ultimately used for public purposes, whether the racetrack went forward or not.
Okay, and is that shown in this request? I guess the part I read was very tiny about what they wanted the money for. I haven't seen anything detailed.
What I recall, but Mike, I'll bounce it back to Mike. What I recall is their analysis was, this was money that was going to be allocated to, the design of the public portion, the public features of the project. But Mike, do you want to take it from there?
I'm still looking for my file, but yes, when in phase 2, when we looked at all of the different pieces of that list of things that they were going to do, I have not received a list like that for this expenditures. We know that
Mike, you just had their full proposal up a few minutes ago that had the further breakdown. That I know we've seen it over time before.
Yeah.
I mean, they did this one pager. Actually, I suggested we did a one pager that they'd have one to put in because I thought it would be easier just to do the recap on it. But I know you just had it on the screen, Mike. Went, yeah.
This is the detail that they'd provided on the facility and future uses.
And if you go back another page, yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
So there's the breakdown of those two numbers that make up the $1.4 million.
Correct. The ones that are highlighted at the bottom, which is design fee for the regional center and construction document fee for the whole facility. There is a construction admin fee for public facilities only, which was not included in that total.
Right.
So are we allowed to pay for the construction documentation fee for the overall facility, which is public and private, Brian?
Oh, yeah. How do you slice this one? As I was saying before, what we've tried to do in the past is have some delineation between public and private. We don't want to be funding some portion of the, race garage condos or the club or something like that. So I would expect either that if possible, try to break out the costs into public versus private, or if there's some way to, if you can't break them out precisely, if there's some way to say overall, the private investment in this is going to be X and the public is Y, and what's the proportion between them? That would be another way to back into it.
Can we invite Axel or Jim to have some input?
You could also invite counsel. That would be helpful. Thank you. Mike.
Okay, just a moment.
So I'll let Jim take the lead on this, but those portions, that's a great question that Pat has there, but those documents I think have been provided about 3 or 4 meetings ago as to the public portion that is directly related to the question you asked, Pat. So it's a great question.
So I would just say, listening to what's going on, in the past, when we've had projects that we've gotten funding for in this scenario, anything that includes public improvement should qualify for the funding. Anything, even though you're using it for public funding, whether or not private needs it as well doesn't really matter. But if there's anything that is specifically for private, then the PFD simply wouldn't reimburse the port for it.
That makes sense.
So if I could just jump in, it's just a quick overview. The board, Darren brought up some really good topics tonight, and just to talk to those shortly is, just remember the port is the only organization who is committed to bonding up front for this project. So we're committed in this project fiscally, and that really protects the PFD, protects you guys, I would think, throughout the process, much more than any other projects out there that don't have current bonding support that could potentially have it in the future. Second of all, this project has shown the return of invested dollars to not only the PFD, but to the community at large. So, end of the day, $1.5 million will provide the return that your organization would really like to have desire on a perfect project. So.
Excellent. How does the port plan on finishing construction, right? We heard we weren't going to come back and ask for construction money for this project. I don't want to be throwing $1.4 million at this project not to have it come to fruition.
Well, Brian could step in if he wants to and explain it again, but they have several different funding mechanisms through the private organization, through there's organizations that are willing to help fund some of these projects because they're going to use it as well. There's sponsorships that are coming through some major organizations, major automotive companies that are looking to do it. And then also the memberships that they would sell. It's all in their P&L that they have listed for you.
So a portion of that goes to fund the public portion of this project.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
John, too, if it helps to clear it up, my understanding, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but that would have to be detailed in the ILA. That is part of the first ILA that we were still saying that needs to be worked out, is what is the specific funding so that we can make a determination that the money that we would invest would be used to complete a project, rather than give that money and then not have the funding be there and have the project not come to fruition, which is part of the reason why we're trying to do this as a simple up or down, so the port knows what our position is and can move forward. Mike, I was also gonna, one second. Mike, I was also gonna say, as I recalled, you had that answer that Aaron was asking for in the minutes after Phil and John came on the board. So I think it would also be in the minutes. You had put it in the minutes specifically to make sure that that question was answered. Sorry to interrupt, Aaron.
No, yeah, you're right. It is in there. I'll look for it there as well.
And you were talking to?
Yes, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. So some of the things that have been brought up here, there seems to be some concern that any of the KPFD funds would be used to fund a private portion of this project. And what I've tried to do in providing the packet, and Mike, I don't know if the entire packet got forwarded to the board, but I hope it did, is the idea that the port wanted to make sure that the private portion and the public portion, while they're meant to work together, the public portion can operate completely independently. If there's some reason the private portion is delayed, never comes to fruition, and what have you, we still have our public portion, which is valuable, which is necessary, and which the port is committed to. So I understand that there needs to be a further breakdown of the cost, especially as to the design fees. On this Zoom call, we also have a representative from CStock, if anybody's interested to hear from her as to the commitment that CStock is making to this project as well for the design fees. But it's really meant to be able to work together, but also to be able to work separately. And I think that's a very important distinction to make. I don't want to muddy the waters and have these things completely intertwined. Brian Nielsen and Circuits of the Northwest that's their idea to contribute to both their private portion and the public portion. But it's very important to realize that these can be two different independent projects.
Does anybody else have any other questions? And Mike, have you found those minutes?
I haven't found the specific minutes. I remember putting them in there, but I don't. Do you remember how far back that was?
Phil and John, what was your first meeting?
July would have been our first meeting.
So it would be the August or September meeting, or it would be the minutes from July or August.
There wasn't an August meeting.
July or September.
Okay.
I'm looking at the time, and I hate to do this because I'm actually chairing the meeting on the other thing. I guess I would just, to the extent I can put my vote in, I do vote in favor of it. We can leave it at that. I need to head out, and I apologize. This came up before this meeting was scheduled.
Sorry that this went long.
No, it's an important thing, but my vote is aye on approving that. And if we can, I'll leave it at that and leave the meeting accordingly.
Is that good? We can accept Phil's vote like that, or do we all have to vote at the same moment?
Everybody has to vote at the same time. So I think if you're voting later, then you've heard Phil's statement of preference, but it's not a vote.
Well, then I'd like to call for a vote so we can go ahead and approve this and let this project keep moving forward.
I would just want to make that statement again, that if we have a limited amount of money and we give money to the 4th ranked project ahead of the 2nd and the 3rd ranked project and ahead of the 1st ranked project, we are taking money away from those projects to fund a lower one. And so I don't understand why those other projects wouldn't come and ask for all that money right now and not go in the way that we have proceeded to this point. That's it.
Yeah, and I'll throw in that, we've got funds left from the ongoing basis right now, our current operating versus what we bonded in 2011. And that's where I look at it as the basis of this money coming from, not out of the new sales tax rebate, not out of the new funding, but being serviced out of that.
Aaron, I would say, though, I think those minutes show that the money that we have now has been earmarked. So this is our current June, and here were our total commitments. And you can take off the 500,000 for Lobie Field.
Right. Now,
but you can see that there's not 1.4 million that is there.
Well, that's June. So that was my point, looking at the financial revenue and expenses by fund now, where we've been plus about anywhere from 70 to what were we, $90,000 this month?
Right.
So.
Yeah, I would.
And again, that wouldn't make up 1.4.
Very close. Yeah.
I'd like to speak in favor of the project. I'm not sure why we would give them the 1.4 up front when, there's two scenarios there for the port bonding for it, and we pay it back over either 5 or 10 years. I would be in favor of the 10 years with no interest, but we can arm wrestle over that. This project seems to be on a fast track. The others are all slipping, as we saw from the Paulsbo request wanting to extend everything out a year. I think we're probably going to see similar extensions from the other project. I think it's important that people see that the PFD is doing something, and this is a chance to do it at relatively low cost and stretch it over either 5 or 10 years and get it done.
You know, I would add to what Walt just said too. We don't have a definitive plan from Heritage yet either. And a lot of what was outlined to us in previous presentations was sort of murky at best. And so I too believe that we have the finances to fund this.
Shall we vote?
Let's call for a vote.
Can I add an attachment to that vote? Is that too late? Can I change something? Can I?
There's no vote has been taken. All we've done is discussion. Everybody has stated their opinions of what they think they would vote, but until we vote right now, and we'll call it so that we can, each person can vote and everybody can hear it. But let's call for the vote. Aaron has made the motion. Phil has seconded it, correct?
Correct. John, was there something you wanted to add, though? I'm curious to hear rather than rush through with a vote.
Yeah, I think I would like to see that maybe, it would make people feel better. Those who have spoken, if the port carry the costs of the finance, we just say, this is the dollar amount we're going to give it no matter what we rake out to that to be.
The details of that funding plan would have to be memorialized in the ILA.
So all we would be voting on now is a thumbs up or thumbs down, yes or no, on the fact that we want to give the port the 1.4 million, and the actual mechanics of how they get that money in a lump sum over time, whatever, are yet to be worked out. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's just an up or a down. The ILAs will still need to be worked out.
Okay.
Okay, then calling for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so can you each state your name so that we can make sure that we know who said aye?
Or how about
Walt Draper, aye.
Aaron Leadham, aye.
Sorry, I think Tom, did you say aye as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so Tom and Phil. And John, did you say aye?
I did, but I didn't say. John says aye.
Okay, and then all those opposed say nay.
Nay.
I will say nay.
And I will too.
All right, but the motion carries 5-2. And so that is the end of 7C. Let's move on to 7D.
Thank you all. I need to leave. Talk to you later.
See you, Phil.
Thank you. Bye, Phil.
Seven D, Mike, your activity report. I think we can all read that on our own and probably maybe have. And then 7E, the regional facility reports. We've also got those in our packets as well and can read those. Is there anything else that we need to discuss before we adjourn our meeting? I would like to then adjourn the meeting. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Good job, Darren.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.